In this week's video, we're going to talk about what you can do as an interview candidate when you get asked a question and, well, you don't have a story to match what they're looking for. Welcome back to Interview App, where we teach you how to use the Amazon leadership principles to land your dream job. It doesn't matter the role, it doesn't matter the company. If you use the things that I teach on this channel, you will show up much better in your interview. So the question I got this past week was from, actually it was a couple weeks ago, but it was a YouTube comment, so thumbs up there, was someone asking, what do I do when I don't have a story to match the question that's being asked of me? And this is a great question. And here's why. Because it is a solvable riddle for you, the interview. The natural instinct is going to be to panic, right? To freak out and go, I don't have a story. There's a couple things I want to talk about here. One, how you prepare, but two, what you can do to then kind of handle this eventuality when it happens. First and foremost, I looked at the way I was preparing when I was going for VP of product and chief product officer roles and kind of analyzed deeply how I was preparing and how deeply sad it made me to prepare the way I was preparing, which was writing long scripts, speeches basically, for answers that I imagined in my head that I would get. And the more of these interviews I've done at interview@.com. By the way, if you want to get your free interview, you can sign up at interview@.com. What I've seen more and more is people were doing exactly what I was doing, writing out these long speeches, and they're trying to imagine every question they might get. And so the panic that's setting in is, I got asked a question that I don't have an answer for. That's a knock on, like a second order problem, to the bigger problem of, well, I just got asked a question and I don't really have a story that maps to that question. So how can you prepare a little bit better to avoid that eventuality? And then two, how can you deal with that actual problem? So one, preparing better. The question doesn't matter. And I know that sounds ridiculous to say, but listen, I was a senior executive, Microsoft, Amazon, Oracle. I've run my own startups. I've hired a lot of people. I've been on the hiring end a lot of times where I'm looking for the job, but I've hired a ton of people. So I'm the guy generally who was kind of running the debrief for the interview, gauging whether or not you got the job. So I kind of know what I'm talking about here. And the question doesn't really matter nearly as much as your answer. And so again, that sounds like a silly thing to say, but it's when I'm analyzing what a candidate is saying to me, I'm not thinking, did they exactly map to the question? Because there's a question behind the question. Whether the interviewer knows it or not, they're probably asking you about customer obsession. They're probably asking you about delivers results. They're probably asking you about dives deep, thinks big, invent and simplify. All of the Amazon leadership principles, they are an awesome categorization framework for how you prepare your stories. And if you prepare your stories to deal with the leadership principle first, and any questions that follow, if you're comfortable enough telling the story, you can kind of tweak the front end of it to map to the question, to kind of do a little improv there. But now you've got your story ready to go, right? So that's one way to avoid the panic of, oh my God, I just got asked a question. I don't have a story for that question because I didn't think of that question. So let's pretend you are now faced with a question and you think to yourself, oh my goodness, I don't have an experience to match to that question. What do I do? It's really simple. You want to come with solutions, not problems, right? That's a general rule of like how you should operate when you're working in a company. Just don't ever show up with just problems. Show up with solutions. A problem would be saying to the interviewer, yeah, I don't really have a story for that, or I don't really have an experience that maps to what you're asking about. Now you've shown up with a problem. You've created more work for them, because they can either look at you with kind of sadness or even contempt and be like, oh, that's so sad. You're not ready for this interview. Boo, you're not going to make it, right? Lots of thoughts going on in their head. Or they might, just look at you with like pity and be like, well, it's kind of a bummer. You've completely blown your shot at working here, right? Any number of things are going on in their heads, but you've shown up with a problem. You didn't show up with a solution. A better answer for you would be, I kind of understand what you're getting at, and if you can, restate what they've asked. And I don't have a story that exactly matches that, but I have one that's kind of close. And so I'd love to talk about that, because just given my work experience, I don't have one that exactly matches that, but I have one that's kind of close, and I'd love to walk you through it. Now you've shown up with a solution, right? You recognize that you don't have one that exactly matches, and that's probably fine, because in a lot of these cases, look, unless it's a super technical interview and they're looking for very specific experiences, more often than not, the questions they're pulling from a question bank, or they have their go-to questions, whatever it is, but they'll be okay with you not 100% mapping to the question, right? If you show up with a, you know what, I've got something that's pretty close, not exactly close, can we talk through it and see if that gets you closer to what you want? That's better than saying, I don't have a story. It's just better. So in this video, we talked a little bit about how you could better prepare to make sure that you've got stories ready to go that map to the question behind the question. And then we've talked about how to handle the situation where even if you have stories ready to go, in your mind, it doesn't necessarily map to the experience or what the interviewer is getting at with the question, how you can show up with a solution instead of a problem by saying, hey, I've got a story that sort of matches, isn't a perfect match, I'd like you to talk you through it, versus, yeah, I don't have a story. And for all of you out there who think that that doesn't happen, it happens. It happens more often than you think. People panic. They're freaking out in interviews. They're basically doing a super stressful thing, and sometimes people just freeze. And they say, I don't have a story. I don't know what to tell you. And then it's a really, really, really uncomfortable silence. So don't be that person in the interview. Well, hopefully you learned something new today, and you'll have a new tool in your toolbox to tackle those hard problems that inevitably arise when you're in your interview looking to get your dream job.